Exactly, actually.
Ruler School is brought to you by Happy Little Hug Factory and their amazing patrons. Extra special thank you to guest lecturer patrons Harris and Lance Albertson. Thank you for your support. Enjoy the video.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back after a long week of Force of Will to the Teacher's Lounge, your weekly Force of Will podcast live, as always, featuring myself, Jeremy Franklin, and Ryan Miles, with the mischievous stern Brandan Bremont, bundled up in his 60-degree weather.
So cold, it literally dropped down to 60 degrees today. I am
Oh, unbearable.
And Frank Klosser.
It's snowing!
Yeah, it's snow! High five.
I apologize for anyone that was too loud, but like,
One morning.
I've been really pumped because I love me some snow.
Well, today
mountains and not on roads.
there were a lot of slide-offs in Michigan today. Michigan has this wonderful thing where usually the first and second snowfall of the year, everyone forgets how to drive. It's really fun.
Oh, that's not unique to you.
I know. It's still fun, though.
If you want real fun, we have to go see the few times where it like snows in like Memphis or something. They have no idea. Like half an inch. Wow.
Hold on. There's potentially some issues going on with the audio. I'm trying to find out.
Oh, no.
Which would suck. Maybe I'm deaf.
Hilarious.
Well, I usually ask. Derek's saying maybe I'm deaf. Everything seems like it's picking up sound.
Yeah, it looks to be good for on my end watching the video.
Yeah, it looks like there's sound. Derek, you're just deaf. Turn up your hearing, dude.
Sorry to tell you.
Make sure that YouTube's not muted.
Big news in your life.
So today we are talking all about set design, specifically talking things that like what all we think goes into set design, what distinguishes a good set from a bad set in all different aspects, and then also kind of wrapping it up with what we think in terms of Force of Will up to this point has been the best designed set based on the standards that we kind of laid out together. And then we're going to wrap it up with a brand new game brought to you by Brandan Bremont, and you as the audience are going to get to participate and see if you can take home the crown tonight and beat all of us. So, with that out of the way, Ryan, this was the topic that you specifically really wanted to bring to the table, so why don't you kind of start us off?
So, I think that there's kind of a bit of a divide between like the competitive hyper, spike players and the super casual like Timmy players where it's always, oh, I really want to play this deck because it's really, really fun. And then it's like, oh, but this is not competitive. Competitive cards have to have this, this, and this. And there's sometimes just very little overlap between competitive and casual. Like when the set first drops, like everyone's just playing whatever they want. But then as time goes on, like the competitive players only narrow down to like what's actually viable, and the casual players like, oh, but my archetype's not viable and it sucks. So I kind of want to talk about like what it is that goes into like bridging the gap between that and making sure that like everything is just fun to play. Like I was kind of thinking about this in response to like the unfun versus like broken things. Like how do you make a set both fun and not broken, like those kind of things? So what goes into that? So I guess to begin this conversation, I want to ask you guys, what is like the most fun like deck you've ever played in Force of Will? Like just like talking from a fun perspective, what's the most fun deck you've ever played in Force of Will? One at a time.
Starting with
Jeremy. Let's start with Jeremy, because Jeremy plays every deck under the sun. I know he has a favorite.
Sure, I do actually have a favorite. My favorite deck of all time was way back in the beginning of Force of Will, and it was blue-green Prissia Tempo.
Oh,
way back. So this was a deck that this was pre-Reflect Refrain, I think. Yeah, it was pre-Reflect Refrain. But it was after Vingolf 1. So like Vlad, we had Vlad, we had Blazer, we had all of that kind of stuff. And that was also when we had this wonderful card called Hanzo Hattori that said when this card enters the field, you draw a card. And it was a flying 1-drop blue 3/3. Beautiful card. I absolutely loved it. It was either it was a 2-drop, I believe. Yes? 1-drop or 2-drop? I think it was 2-drop.
Hanzo was a 2-drop.
2-drop, 1 blue, 1 colorless, 3/3 with flying, and it said when this card enters the field, you draw a card. And there was this other really awesome card called Alice's Castling, which, so blue-green in that era, with Pristia being able to produce Will of any color, she had this very interesting, for Sacred Beasts, she had this really, really good engine that was all about combat tricks. And this was probably, in my opinion, at the beginning of Force of Will, when this deck probably, Prisia and the Sacred Beast and that kind of stuff, probably had the most combat tricks of any deck at the time. And I absolutely love that kind of like intricacies of battle interaction. So that deck was super fun, and it was just a value town. So there was some silly things that you could do with Alice's Castling would be like, you know, swing in with your Zhu Kuei, which you could drop on like turn 1 and like burn something because of Horn of Sacred Beast. And then the next turn you like would try to swing in with it again, and then they'd be like, oh, well, I'll kill it. You go, cool, Alice's Castling, flash it out, flash in a Hanzo, draw a card off of Alice's Castling, draw another card off of Hanzo coming into play. So you like you just kept generating value. And then you also had some really crazy things that you could do with a lot of 3-drops, because you had the dragon for them. We lost Brandon. You have the dragon that was like draw a card if you control another magic sacred beast. You had the turtle that bounced a thing if you like based on the number of sacred beasts you controlled. So you had a lot of these like really solid intricacies, ways to disrupt your opponent's tempo while just kind of continuously pushing this board state. And the other thing I really liked about that deck was I sideboarded into Blazer with that deck.
Oh my God.
What I would do is I built it in such a way that the only cards I would lose in sideboarding out Prisia into Blazer was the Tiger, and so I would just bring in a play set of Thunders. because with Blazer, all my stones produce red, so I wouldn't lose Zhu Kuei. So I had this really natural way to not disrupt my deck's like ability, because I still could use the horn to produce. With still being, and then have J-Ruler hate built into the deck, and it was all just kind of like all about tempo and countering my opponent's stuff and kind of forcing them back into a corner. And that deck was just fun. I remember, I think in one turn, thanks to Alice's Castling, I dropped like 3 Zhu Kueis in one turn. I like swung with Hanzo, Alice's Castling it into a Zhu Kuei, burned a thing, drew a card, swing with Zhu Kuei, Alice's Castling into another Zhu Kuei, Alice's Castling into another Zhu Kuei. And it's just like, whoop, whoop, whoop. Okay, take 12. There was just a lot of... My favorite kinds of decks in Force of Will are ones that have a lot of those kind of combat tricks and like instant speed interactions. So that was my favorite. Gotcha.
I've never even heard of that deck before, so that was like an interesting trip through time, because I'm like, I know what all of these cards do, but I've never put them together like that before, so that was interesting.
I don't even have that advantage, because I didn't know what a single card he just named does.
I have a video of it on the channel, I think. Go back and watch it.
Oh my god. Yeah, we have to dig. All right, Frank and/or Brandon, favorite deck?
My favorite deck, this is a little bit... this isn't like a great answer, but
wait, I want to guess. Is it... Okay. Wait, Is it Dark Alice? I have to guess it's Dark Alice.
No, Dark Alice is great, but it doesn't. That draws as many cards as Guinevere draws.
Oh, that's fair. Okay, I understand.
It's definitely Turbo Feats Guiber Guinevere deck. The one from LEL or the set immediately after that or whatever.
Also a deck that used Alice's Castling.
But basically, it was a Guinevere deck. Guinevere is just my favorite card of all time. Draws so many cards. Ruckake draws cards. Alice's Little Scout draws cards. Adam Quality draws cards. The whole deck just like, you have an empty hand on one turn, and then you have 5 cards the next turn while you're producing huge things. And so you get to play this incredible board combat game while also just drawing your whole deck. Nothing has ever felt better or more well-oiled or clean or fun than just cycling through the rhythms of that feasting deck. It just felt natural. It felt great. It felt fun. The deck was amazing.
Gotcha. And Frank, what's your fondest memory?
Overall, it would be Kaguya's Moonbeam Butterfly deck, specifically like the various blue, white, green versions. Probably the version I liked the most was the Val 2 version that existed around that same time frame, like the LEL time frame. But I played some Lumia ones. I played quite a few different rulers that were different takes on give me blue, white, green stones, some ramp, Moonbeam Butterfly, and then a toolbox of stuff.
Gotcha. I know for me personally, my favorite deck of all time was the 5-color Control Reflector Frame deck. You may remember I topped 2 GPs with it, but most notably, Alex Blandon took it to 2nd place at GP Vegas and played a horrendous 4-hour top 8 match against Jalen.
Yeah, where he purposely didn't swing for lethal about 17 times.
Oh god. Anyway, so it was just like 40 cards of not letting your opponent do stuff. I'm sorry, it was 36 cards of not letting your opponent do stuff, and then 2 Celestial Wing Seraph, 2 Lucifer, and that was just the deck. Your goal was to just like flip as soon as possible, and then just like tap orbs, and then flip back down, and then stop calling stones, and just make sure your opponent could never do anything thanks to the help of your handy dandy ruler Reflector Frame. But when you look at, I guess, all 4 of these different deck archetypes, you've got Jeremy's deck, which is just a combination of this very intentionally designed interaction between Prisia and the Sacred Beasts, and just like that core mechanic, and then also a bunch of like flex stuff that he decided to go into blue-green for, and abuse Alice's castling. Turbo Gwyber is probably like one of the quintessential examples of just players breaking the game in a way that the company probably don't expect. You know, you've got this abuse of Feasting and Gwyber, you've got this abuse of Guinevere and Feasting, you've got this abuse of Adam Brawley and all the 1-drops that facilitate the Gwyber, and these are just like cards that were like printed that were powerful, that all came together to exceed probably the design expectations individually, because they all came out like at separate instances throughout the lifetime of Force of Will.
Yeah.
And then Frank just wants to play Kaguya's Meme Butterfly. I don't even...
I like playing
Toolbox. The man likes toolbox decks.
I like interactive mid-range decks that can switch between being reactive and aggressive.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So with the Val 2 specifically as a ruler, that's just a lot of power that's front-loaded into that card in particular, and again, like a by design kind of thing. And then the Reflector Frame is very similar to Turbo Gwyber, where it's just a bunch of cards that, well, the Reflector Frame control is a bit more like these cards don't inherently have synergy. You're just like preventing your opponent from doing anything. So from an overall design perspective, I think most people have had the most fun in the older formats when Force of Will was printing cards. They were printing Kaguya's Meme Butterfly, they were printing Gwyber, they were printing Adam Brawley, they were printing Guinevere, they were printing Hanzo Hattori, they were printing Flame of the Outer World. Like, they were just printing cards that did things. And then Array Cluster happened, and then suddenly, even like LEL to an extent started doing this, but it
Archetypes?
Really got, I think, worse than Array Cluster. Yeah, like the archetypes where they're trying to force you into doing a certain thing. And if you look at like the even like the metagame right now, like, I just don't think that this is something that players are particularly interested in. So I think that like in terms of game design, like they have failed in many like at a competitive level, especially. I think there are still people who love pandas for some reason, but like nobody loves pandas as much as Driz Foskin loves Dark Alice. Okay, maybe Colin loves pandas.
I was about to say Colin,
loves Dark Alice, but like I think it's not only like gone down in the sense that like casual players are no longer like identifying with characters as much. It's almost like being forced on you so much that the Timmy player doesn't feel like they have as much of a unique identity that they get to like pick a ruler and be the only person who likes that ruler, because like everybody has to pick an archetype to be able to play Force of Will now. The Johnny player can't really flex their muscles and figure out how to build a deck because all of the archetypes are just like forcing themselves to build themselves. And the Spike players are just like, well, you printed Scheherazade and then you printed Time Spinning Witch, and before that we had Prisia, so we haven't been able to like do anything creative to break the game in a long time. So like in that sense, I think that the most recent sets, and especially without dual stones, have definitely been less interesting than older sets. This is my hot take for the evening, gentlemen.
So
what do you
I would agree with you for the most part. In the terms of there definitely has been a harder push on archetypes, and I think that comes from Force of Will trying to kind of reset itself in terms of what color identities are, because you have to kind of start somewhere, right? And so like the easiest way to make a color make sense is to make all of the cards fit into that color, and the easiest way to do that is to make an archetype thematically, artistically, in terms of like making sure that everything has a really consistent theme, and you can just go to one artist and be like, or like a few artists, and go like, this is what we're going for, please make us this thing, as opposed to going everywhere. So I think there's definitely some business side to it. I think one thing that is missing in Force of Will in terms of that set design is we have lost staples. And hear me out in terms of what that means. Staples are exactly what you're kind of talking about, Ryan. It's just good cards. They don't have to synergize, they just like are good. And now don't get me wrong, we have some cards that just are good, but they're not good in like everything. And I also think that in the past, in Rhea Cluster specifically, I think and like the tail end of Lapis Cluster, I think the staples were too strong, and so therefore has pushed Force of Will away from wanting to print staples. Make staples.
Disagree. I think we have a lot of staples. I think they all got banned. We have Otherworld Dreams.
Right, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. In that sense of like the staples that we had were too strong, and so they banned all of those. And now Force of Will is being kind of cautious about whether to print a staple or not, or like how to print staples, because they don't want to cause another issue where they accidentally overpower it. And I think because we've lost this quintessential idea of a staple being a not overpowered but generically strong card that everybody can play, so that everybody has a chance to be on an even playing field in terms of having access to those cards without like just being backbreaking, that it does limit some set design. You know, thinking back to way back in the day, like you're saying, Flames of the Outer World, like that card, red-black, was much easier to splash into color-wise. That card was not
color stones at the time.
Right. That card was also not, don't get me wrong, that card was very good, but it could be countered by things that existed in the format, and by itself was not insanely strong. Like, most J-Rulers had to be taken twice with Flames of the Outer World. Cool, you're paying 4 to kill my J-Ruler. Like,
and 2 cards.
And 2 cards, right? So, like, that card was strong, but it wasn't, and it was accessible by most people, but it wasn't, like, just back-breaking to your opponent. And I think that our staples spiked in terms of how strong they were and how accessible they were, and we didn't. And now we've crashed in that we don't have them anymore. And so I think if we can try to have some balanced staples back in the format, like for instance, I think that right now a staple card that probably every deck could be reaching to find room for is as like a 2 or a 3 of is honestly Angel Statue. Like costs 2, lets you filter, kind of splash into another thing. Ultimately, with Time Spinning Witch in the format, you definitely can't really spend the time to be able to, like, waste a turn playing a ramp card like that. But, like, if Time Spinning Witch wasn't what she is, I think that card would probably be a staple 2 or 3 of in most decks, outside of, like, pure raw aggro. Because it's, again, it's not backbreaking, but it gives every deck something, and everyone has access to it. That would be my idea of, like, what a staple should be. And I think that we're moving in that direction, but I think we've also been a little bit spoiled by what a staple is, and Force of Will's trying to kind of correct it, but they've kind of like overcorrected. So now we have to try to get back to the middle. So
don't take this the wrong way, but I get the feeling that some of this opinion comes from the fact that you guys come from Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah, I mean,
I can arguably say that.
Because the way you're describing staples is coming from Magic, where they have this, like, this specific color spread and stuff. Like, any card that gets too much of a staple, like, even if it's not super oppressive, starts to be talking about was there some design error in this card, because the whole point of the spread is to balance things out and let every time you get, like, especially, for example, when you list a colorless card as a staple, that's really dangerous. Whoops, sorry. That's really dangerous because while it seems like, oh, it's this card that every deck can splash and every deck can use, what's going to happen is what's happening right now, where because it's colorless and because everyone can use it and it's really good, the best deck just becomes whichever deck uses it best, which in this case is Time Spinning Witch. Right. And like that's not a coincidence. Like other decks aren't using it because once you start like, oh, I want some more colors, so I want to splash this. And so I can use this to filter my mana. It's like, well, every time you're doing that, you're just getting one step closer to being Time Spinning Witch and being a worse Time Spinning Witch deck, which is why the other successful multicolor decks haven't been really using that card. They've been built in a different way such they can still be multicolor without having to rely on that card. So they are a distinct deck taking advantage of different strengths.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can concede the fact that as it stands right now, especially like that. I say statue in the sense of being a quote-unquote staple, and again, I will admit it comes from a Yu-Gi-Oh background, in the sense of, like, you're right, it is that card that everybody can splash. However, if I were to see staples, like, if I would say, like, okay, these are the kind of cards that I would want to see being staple, I'd want to go back to the era of, like, Flames of the Outer World. I'd want to go back to the era of where you do have to kind of invest into it, or, like, that kind of thing. It's not necessarily
but our problem right now isn't that, like, we don't have a Flames of the Outer World level, like, card. It's that the current format exists in such a way that a 2-mana removal spell just isn't particularly good.
Oh, sure, I agree.
Spending mana isn't particularly good thanks to Time Splitting Witch. I think that does kind of warp the format. But
sorry, I had one other thing I wanted to talk about,
sure.
which was like, so I guess this is just sort of me deciding to fight with Ryan tonight, but I would actually argue the opposite. Like the fact that we had a cluster that was focused around like heavy, not tribals and like, oh, we're playing fairies, but very archetype heavy deck is not inherently a bad thing. It does change things for a bit because now you're sort of like, you're changing the design space. And like, you don't want to do that all the time, but if you do it sometimes, they become very popular. And like, I honestly really enjoyed Rhea Cluster. Like, my favorite deck was this one that existed between multiple clusters and very specific things, but the Rhea Cluster might have been my favorite cluster in like Force of Will so far. Like, there was a lot of cool stuff going on, and like, there were some oversights. They were like the cards we obviously had to ban because there were problems there, but other blocks had issues like that too. And like, if you look at like, again, I'm going to go back to Magic because it's where I came from. Like some of Magic's, if not Magic's almost inarguable most popular sets are the 3 Ravnica blocks. And those are as archetype heavy as you can get. And like, not just from a, oh, the cards want you to build into archetypes. It's, these sets themselves are built, here's a giant flavor splash of archetypes, and everyone loved it. Like, everyone loved identifying with, this is my guild.
So I do want to say I don't think that archetypes are inherently bad. I just think that Rhea Cluster, where Force will kind of drop the ball on doing them. Because, like, looking at it, the Lapis Cluster was actually kind of archetypical. It did it in, like, a 2-color sense. Like, I think Fox is an archetype, but, like, that's a fun deck to play. Up until it got demonic, then I would say. Lumia was an archetype. They just took the Lumia out of the red-white flicker archetype and then put it into green and said, oh, this is way better. So like you still Lapis Cluster was an archetype set that had playable cards across colors. Then Rhea Cluster came in and said, here's the color red. You have 75% strength counter cards. Okay, set 2, here's Welser. Like, what does Welser play? Like, every card that you want to play in Welser, when all of the stones produce red mana, are blocked by strength counters. So I think, like, when they start doing stuff like that, when half the black cards need mystery counters to be able to function, and you don't have very significant mystery counter generation until set 3, set 4, like, that's where I think the archetype failed. Like, I don't think archetypes are inherently bad. I just think that, like, the whole of Rhea Cluster was where Force of Will kind of stopped just printing good cards and focused so hard on the archetype that you could not play into a color without being that like archetype specific deck. But at
the same time, it like didn't give you enough. Like you almost didn't have enough.
In terms of competitive standing, yeah. If you wanted to play a casual Panda deck, like you have the stuff for it. If you wanted to play a casual Rhea deck, you had the cards for it. Like you could have a good time. But like now we're seeing like the ramifications where we've rotated out the OP Lapis Cluster stuff. We've rotated out the dual stones, and now we're competing. Like even if Time Splitting Witch gets banned tomorrow, like what do we expect the best decks to be? Or like if Distortion Time gets banned, if Lori gets banned, if Ivy gets banned, like I think Kyric's good because it's got some absolutely degenerate like red stuff going on, but outside of that, I don't think Pandas are better than Brunhild. I don't think any of the green decks are better than Shimimi Hanzo, but we banned Scheherazade, so I guess that's not entirely correct. But even then, like the half the set was designed around like kind of elementals and stuff, and then we just printed puppets. And while green is so broken that both Gil and Scheherazade are completely playable decks, like they just like each took half of the cards. Like there was just very little overlap between what made a Scheherazade deck, what made a Gil deck outside of 4 Lorite, 4 Fair Spell, 4 Ruin Stories, and now. Yeah.
I think the problem might actually be more simple than we're giving it credit for. Because what you're saying isn't even you're not even complaining about archetypes. All you're complaining about is broken cards, and that really is the core of the problem. Because the fact that Scheherazade was an entirely archetypical deck, like you played Scheherazade, you played Dollmaker, you played $1 million, you played Ruin Story. That was exactly what they printed. It was just powerful. Keurig, you're playing all of the strength counter cards in New Frontiers. It's just powerful, but it's not as powerful as Chimimi with a bunch of green resonators or Time Spinning Witch with Mosasaurus, Time Source Surfacing, and all that. And so what we're really saying here is not that they need to print less or more archetypes, that they just need to balance colors more, that they need to give you more options to counter archetypes or counter colors or counter strategies.
And I think this speaks to, Jeff has even spoken to this in his live streams as well. When he entered the game as the global liaison, like the next sets had kind of already been decided for him. They were already like printed and designed and everything else, so he didn't really have much influence. But he's talked about how he's been trying to influence more in terms of set design, speaking about if there's a threat in a set, there also needs to be an answer in the set.
At the same time.
And at the same time. And I think
that's a cute way of thinking, but historically, Forza Wilco has not been very good at making their answers actually good answers.
I agree. Mm-hmm. And I think that, again, it's like a two-stage problem. One, it's always been we introduce a problem and the next set we solve it, which never creates a good situation. Or we get into a situation like you're saying where we introduce a problem and we think this is an answer, but it's really not.
What Jeremy's saying is, like, there was an instance where we had Levitine and we didn't have Death Scythe, and that was a problem. And then there was an instance where we had Reflect for 2 sets, and then later we got Black Moonbeam. And that's even a situation where, okay, Black Moon isn't actually the answer to the Reflect.
Right, exactly.
It's part of the problem. But, like, we had Reflect and no Black Moonbeam for 2 whole sets. Like, imagine if Distortion of Time comes out in TSW, and then Lorite comes out and Winds of the Ominous Moons. Like, for 3 months, it's just like, well, even though Scheherazad's broken, it literally can't do anything about Distortion of Time, like that kind of thing.
Exactly.
So they did fix that problem at least.
But the thing that needs to happen now is
another bad solution though, because Lorites counter Lorites, and so Lorite gets played in Witch, and now
Lorite's a terrible.
We're not. Yeah, we're still. They're still figuring out how to make proper answers. And I think what we're saying is...
Just imagine if Lorite didn't exist, though.
That's the problem. I think they need to learn to make proper threats, which is that they need to stop making such cheap, powerful, uninteractive abilities in the first place. I mean, like, and maybe they are doing well, because in this new set, there isn't a lot of that. A lot of Valhalla has been pretty balanced, pretty powerful, on expensive interactive threats, which I think is very cool. And so that is what they need to start correcting. The answers can follow, not making overpowered threats. And I think that's what they need.
Sure. And I think that we're seeing that more. I think we've talked about this. We talked about it when Alice Cluster left. We talked about it when Lapis Cluster left. We're still talking about it, I think, as we wait for Rhea to Cluster to leave, is that and like as sets go, as the ban list changes, like the pool of what happens gets kind of smaller and smaller and smaller. But it is kind of been this whole idea of like the dying grasps of this old nature of set design are still overshadowing the balance of new set design, which I think is a struggle, right? And like they're trying to figure it out as best they can. But I still think with each set we are getting a little better and a little better and a little better. It is a balance though, in the form of you don't want to make it uninteresting. Like you don't want to make a set like this set is perfectly balanced and boring as hell.
No. I completely disagree with that. So like take Distortion of Time.
Sure.
The God's Art Chrono Break could have cost 3 blue time and actually been decently interesting. It is the fact that it is so pushed and so cheap at 3 mana, with one of which is produced by the ruler, that's the problem. If that God's Art was 5 mana, it would actually be interesting, and we'd actually be talking about it as a fun song.
No, that's what I'm saying. As I'm saying, they have to be careful. I agree with you on that, Brandon. In fact, that would have been cool. Like that would have been fun and interesting, and you would have built around it, and it wouldn't have been so oppressive. What I'm saying is, one of the problems, or one of the things that we have to watch out for, not that Force of Will is falling into this trap, because I don't think they are, but I think that you have to be careful when doing this balancing work, that you have to create sets that are both balanced and interesting, because I think that we can't have... You can make... I mean, Force of Will could print a set tomorrow that was balanced as heck and boring as hell. Case in point, Vingolf 2. Like, Vingolf 2... Like, Vingolf 2 had a lot of... But here's the thing. Vingolf 2 played within itself actually had a lot of fun, or actually had a lot of, like, pretty solid balance between the different colors. The problem was it was all super basic and really boring, and it didn't affect anything outside of itself, so it didn't get popular.
But was it basic and boring compared to the set it was put in, or basic and boring of its own accord? Because I think if you look at New Valhalla, it's a lot more basic than a lot of the sets we've had before, and I don't think it's boring at all. I think it was actually quite interesting as a
Yeah, like I said, I don't think they're actually falling into this trap right now, Brandon. I just think they have to be careful not to fall into it.
I want to chime in here. I do think that Brandon has a lot of points, but I think his points are very targeted at specifically card design, where there have been numerous outliers in Forcible's history where they've taken a card that had a cool idea, like a Distortion of Time, like you're saying. Hey, let's make an archetype where we get to not let your opponent untap. You know, let's print Stasis. Cool, sounds great. I'm on board. How much does it cost, Forcible? They're like, yeah, 3 mana sounds fine. And it's like, no, Forcible. No, you can't do that. Conceptually, I think the idea of having a Stasis deck is great. They just failed in the execution of specifically like that card. But as a set overall, like when we're taking a step back and saying, okay, like what concepts are you trying to introduce to the game? Are these concepts going to be fun? And like, are these different decks going to interact with each other? Like imagine that Scheherazade and Time Spinning Witch are not inherently broken and they don't have broken cards, right? Imagine they're balanced. You have a deck that wants to play the game completely at quick cast speed and also has an extra 5 cards outside of the game that they can use as resources, like to be able to spend their mana when they don't have the appropriate cards in hand. You know, you get to approach when you don't have a 1-drop to play. You get to ruin stories for back down 2 stories when you don't have your Ava. Like, that is a deck built conceptually against a Time Spinning Witch deck who wants to make sure that it's going to punish you for tapping your mana at sorcery speed. I think those two concepts playing against each other is actually really, really cool. They just took the execution of it and said, oh, we don't know how to design cards. But, like, taking a step back, I think that was actually, like, really, really neat. And I liked that part of Riot Cluster because I think that outside the initial 5 rulers, they started introducing some really cool concepts. I think Welser was actually super, super neat up until they printed him and made him cost 5 to Judgment and have like ludicrously expensive cards across the board. Again, another like concept that seemed really good, but then failed at execution. And then moving past Lapis Cluster, I think New Valhalla is a set where we are printing both powerful cards and archetypes at the same time and actually marrying the two very, very well. And I'm actually looking forward to them improving on what I perceive as the mistakes they did make in Riot Cluster. And on top of that, we don't have any brokenly like powerful cards from New Valhalla to my knowledge, and at least in terms of like New Frontiers, like broken. Maybe Forest Meditation, but even then it's like kind of broken.
Yeah, but without,
like
I mean,
oppressive, it's just 0 mana draw fee. It's not like oppressive, it's just I draw a lot of cards. So Frank, haven't heard from you in a while. What is your opinion on like New Valhalla versus Riot Cluster, and then like just card design versus set design and stuff?
I think that this is a case where we're not going to reach a consensus because
which is fine.
Specifically because the format had these specifically overpowered cards, because we had the Scheherazades, because they were so much more, we did not have a chance to explore the set outside of those. And so, like, you'll get very, like, so for example, Ryan's opinion on the thing is going to be very different than mine, because Ryan plays, to my knowledge, almost exclusively, like, competitively. And so he was very focused on, throughout the entirety of Riot Cluster's printing, he was playing just all of the most competitive decks. And, like, compared to the rest of us, Jeremy probably plays the broadest base of decks. And so his opinion of Riot Cluster is going to be very different, because he was experiencing the cluster through being all of that broad array of decks, assumedly getting beaten up by Scheherazade and Time Spinning Witch. Apologies if that's the life you had to live.
I mean, my locals are, and I think that is something, before Frank goes on, I think that is something that we also have to recognize in terms of talking about casual versus competitive. And I think that all of us, by existing in our locals, have to recognize that we probably have some influence over the competitive level of our locals. I think the only place where that doesn't exist, weirdly enough, is at my locals, which is why I kind of enjoy being able to do broad stuff, because my locals are completely not influenced by the fact that I try to be a competitive player. So I get to come and play, have a lot of fun. So I do think it's possible for locals to like completely ignore hyper-competitive lists. And I think that we all have to recognize our own bias in the sense that us being in those places probably influences how competitive people try to be or the decks they bring. But I think, so we all have to kind of admit that and this idea, this concept. But back to you, Frank.
So I guess what I was getting at is that, like, because we're all experiencing it a little differently, it's like, it's hard to get a crack at what like the format would have looked like if we didn't have, like, if they just had never printed the set of cards we had to ban to get through that cluster. And so, like, for example, like, there were a couple, like, you listed Welser as one where, like, it's like, well, they just, like, completely busted him. Like, he does something cool, but they completely busted him. But on the other hand, all he has to do is be a step too cheaper, and he's exactly the oppressive problem you don't want to be there. And he did pay you off for a whole lot of good deck building. Like, there were a couple different ways to build him, and, like, you had to, like, really put him together correctly to not have him just, like, fall apart and look like he's doing nothing. Like, that's exactly the kind of deck building use that you want to do. It's just that, like, even when built correctly, he couldn't keep up with just, like, generically broken decks they printed.
Oh, I agree. I think Welser is the good case, and everything else should come down to Welser's level.
Yeah, because I would argue, like, Welser was pretty well designed. He did something, like, really big, really splashy, but you had to try. Dark Elves were really well designed. Their cards were not awful, but they were a little bit under, like, the best cards. But they were a good synergy deck where the sum of the cards was a lot better, and the cards weren't bad enough that you just couldn't play any of them alone.
And then Golem's mistakes was that
Golems were awful.
Except, I mean,
something which mobilize. Who thought that? Like,
so just as a quick little thing, if mobilize had been an activate ability like instant speed, I think Golems could have had more creativity. But anyway, that's a side note.
Yeah.
Speaking of poor set design, Golems. So anyway,
but and this one's gonna get a little hate because, like, this was also, like, before we got some of the other busted stuff, this was viewed as one of, like, the scary decks of the format. But, like, Ferrer did some pretty cool things, and, like, while some of it was his own stuff, some of it was pulling other stuff. Like, I saw plenty of, like, the green black list that Brandon's team brought was like, oh, well, let's bring in a bunch of hand disruption and maybe some Jones and these other, like, low cost things so that we can be, like, lots of mana to start multi-spelling real quick. But we also saw, like, red green Ferrer, where it was like, okay, let's take red's good aggressive stuff, pair it with this tribal archetype, and sort of go really wide and big fast. And then we saw some, like, green blue ones where it's like, let's take this tribal stuff and let's add in a bunch of interaction on top of it. Like, we saw that deck doing, like, we saw a lot of interesting things with that. So, like, there was a lot of good there. It's just that, like you brag on pandas a lot, but I would bet you that if we'd had that format without, like, the busted cards and without Final Battle specifically, pandas would at least have been something we would have talked about on multiple occasions. Even if it didn't win stuff, it would have been something that, like, was something like, oh, should we be looking at pandas a few times? It just, it was preempted with the set beforehand, an answer that was ubiquitous and perfectly answered it. Like, there's a lot of individual environmental factors that went to make, like, the cluster look less impressive than it was.
I can see what you're saying with that. So I just kind of want to follow up on that point specifically. Do you think that when Force of Will is approaching the design of a new set, should they be, like, obviously you want to avoid power creep, but, like, when you're printing pandas and you know that Final Battle exists, do you just print pandas as is and say casual players will love this no matter what because they're not going to worry about Final Battle? Or even, like, are they worried that because Final Battle exists that panda players will not have fun at their locals because they'll play their other guys, they'll get Final Battled? Like, do you build your archetype and then say, oh, here's an answer to, like, this oppressive card? Or do you go and say we need to ban this oppressive card because we made a mistake? Or, like, how do you think they should be approaching that kind of thing?
So in this case, I would say it's a matter of building the archetype slightly differently. Okay. Because pandas was inherently, like, pandas base archetype is pretty simple. It's a go wide archetype where, like, we want to get a lot of guys out at the same time, and we're trying to just sort of go around your ability to get us on the ground. Ferrer successfully did that in the same format. And then another way you can get around it is, like, right now we have a go wide archetype by some good removal, and, like, Brunhild exists. But then there's also ways that it plays around that, like Ear letting you suddenly recover from that, or, like, Brunhild being inherently, like, she has a little bit of ability to recover from that. Like, there are ways to build around it if you're cognizant of it, where you, like, adjust the archetype a little bit so that it is not beat by its answer cards, but not just, like, shut down by them. That was sort of Panda's problem, was that they were inherently shut down. Not just like, oh, this was a card that was good against them. It was, they're done.
Brandon, you got any thoughts to add on to that?
Well, I think that as with most things, it's about the scale of it, right? You don't want to print too much of this archetype support that's going to drown out any ability to creatively solve a format. I think that's another big problem that we sort of didn't address. But like when a deck is extremely narrow, it also narrows your ability to event the good decks that exist. If there was a darkness card right now that was printed that was really good against time spinning witch, it really wouldn't matter because darkness kind of just sucks in the format right now, and so you couldn't build a dark deck to take advantage of it without losing to a lot of other things because a lot of the dark cards are so squared into their archetypes. But if you allow that to be more broad and allow more cards to be printed, then the format is allowed to be a little bit more self-correcting. So that helps a little bit. And so this kind of addresses the Final Battle Pandas problem, where if Pandas wasn't so shoehorned, then maybe there's a white deck or at least a white sideboard that lets you get over Final Battle. But that doesn't exist largely because of their of Rhea's cluster's very narrow set design.
I'm going to argue that black is probably, like, I think the next best color outside of the green, but I'll concede that. I think that red actually suffers the most from like the color identity problem, where so many of the red cards are either Welser cards or Kirit cards or bad ISIS cards, and like a lot of the red cards in New Valhalla specifically.
All right, Ryan. What are
purposely
like, the 3 best decks for like Orlando right now? You have like Chamimi mono green, time spinning which is blue green, Kirit which is mono red. The last 2 are white and black, and at least white has Brunhild.
So okay, I think that like black.
What's the good darkness deck? Give me a good darkness deck.
I think that Lucifer is a really good deck. I just think that it kind of...
Just look at these boys shaking their heads.
I played against a lot of Lucifers recently and a lot of black decks. And the problem they run into...
If Lucifer was first in the world, eat my butt.
In a format that's not New Frontiers.
Yeah, I see. No, I think Darkness actually has some of the best staples. I think that Jeanne d'Arc is one of the best cards in the set. I think Faith in Darkness.
Every archetype they printed for it sucks.
I think Dark Elves are good. I think Dark Elves is the
boys.
Team,
okay, boys, relax. We have to get to one final point before we jump into our game for the night.
Fair.
We can get into arguments about colors in our private conversation after this.
Next week we fight on colors.
So one thing is we've had Grim Cluster, Alice Cluster, Lapis Cluster, Rhea Cluster, moving into Valhalla Cluster.
Yep.
So 5 clusters with 1 set of the 5th cluster. Up to this point, in looking at sets, in your opinion, what has been the best designed set? Now, I'll say this in the sense of this. So, I say this encompassing everything that we've talked about. So it's not just about how competitive that set is by itself. It's not just about how competitive that deck is when you combine it to the full format. Whatever. However your stipulations are, in your opinion, what is the best designed set of Force of Will? And you can give your argument as to what led you to that decision as well. So maybe if you are thinking competitively, that's why, or something like that. But that's what, kind of I'm thinking in terms of where you want to go. So anybody can go first, or we'll take a minute to think about it. Let us know in the chat as well what your favorite, you think the best designed set was.
As much as I still think that runes were a mistake, I'm going to say New Valhalla.
Whoa, let's flash back a couple episodes to Brandan Bremont. I hate runes. Why are they introducing runes to the game? Can we pull up
runes are devastatingly incorrect design, but the rest of the set was so good, and the runes were generally, besides exactly Forest Meditation, are generally pretty tame enough that it's been okay. It combined also with the fact that you have to play a blank ruler to play them is like kind of fine. So we'll see. I still predict that they become a problem with future sets, but for now, Valhalla is a good set.
I want to go back and like get Brandon to talk about runes from like a couple of months ago.
You can just go clip it.
I want to make a montage. Like, hold on, where's Colin? I need to get this man on the job.
Ryan, do you have what you think was the best designed set of Force of Will?
I'm like going through the arguments in my head before I like say this, and then someone says this really obvious point as to why I'm wrong, and then I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. But I actually think it was CFC, Curse of the Frozen Casket.
Curse of the Frozen Casket.
Yeah, so that was. Yeah, we got Captain Hook, we got Red Boy, we got Sacred Elf, we got Melfi, we got Tama. We had a lot of fun, powerful cards with some really interesting thematic rulers behind them. Like Charlotte was super fun to play. If you were a control player, Mikage was amazing. Feasting was great. Like, not all these. Zero was an icon, and Force of Will still is. Like, the reimagining of the older characters, the creating of new characters. Like, there was so much going on thematically for the set. The art was great. Competitively, you completely redefined the format from the end of Alice Cluster into the beginning of Grim Cluster. Like, they were actually like, you were taking all the staples and then putting these cool new rulers. I thought that was a success in Cluster. I thought it was a success in New Frontiers. I thought it was a success, like, fun-wise. Like, all the decks from that format were fun to play in Cluster and New Frontiers and even Wanderer, I assume. Like, just, yeah, that's just CFC, the whole package, man. That's where my vote goes.
Okay. Frank?
I need another second to think.
Sure.
I must have missed this on our topics tonight, and I don't want to rush.
I'm trying to remember. So, Legacy Lost had what rule? It was Fox, Lumia.
Nothing else
Soul?
mattered. Fox and Lumia.
Soul,
yeah.
Fox, Lumia, Soul, and the other two rulers were
Black, green,
blue, white. It was the Dragon Millium.
Dragonoid Millium.
No, Dragonoid Millium was in Echoes of the New World. It was the Priscia Feria.
Oh, you're right.
No, Feria and Millium.
No, Millium was already E.
Yeah.
It was green, black, green, blue. No, Kaguya. Green, white, Faria.
I'm
white.
just pulling it up right now.
Yeah, green, blue.
Red.
That was Kaguya.
White, red.
Yep.
White red was Lumia. Kaguya was already E.
It was in Echoes. I mean,
Blue, black, Val 3.
Yeah, Val 3.
So it was Val 3, Lumia.
Yep.
I'll just go get my ruler box. 1 second.
Oh, we
Val
have
3,
them, Jeremy.
Lumia, Fox, Faria, Soul.
Yeah.
Those are the 5.
Here we go.
Jeremy.
So it was Glorious, Valentina, Fox, Lumia, Soul.
That's what we just said.
I know. I'm confirming it from the database.
Jeremy's coming to confirm with his
We're gonna
own
get a third confirm here from Jeremy.
Jeremy's got like the ledger. He doesn't believe in this newfangled technology or word of mouth.
I have every ruler in one binder. You're right. So
yeah.
Okay. So yeah, Soul, Lumia, Gloria, Glorious, Fox, and Valentina. I honestly think what?
Third time's the charm.
Yep. I honestly think that set. I like that set a lot, honestly. And I say that from the perspective of being the person who likes to play Go Wide. And I will specifically say LEL, like cut. Like, not... That set became gross the second we printed the next set of the next set. Like, gross. But, like, LEL as it existed by itself, I think was probably my favorite set designed. I also say this from the perspective of I know the fact that Japan doesn't necessarily, at least back then, didn't test super far outside of like the set itself in terms of building. So like Lumia Hook, that was like primarily something that was created by players, not the company. So I think that that's something to like keep in mind. But
to be
like,
fair, most of us thought it wasn't going to be playable because we thought that Griffin was just better.
Exactly. So, but like that set by itself introduced, in my opinion, 5 very fun decks to play. I like all 5 of those rulers. I remember building decks for the channel and enjoying myself playing them. The fact
did Soul really introduce a deck though?
No, I mean, but like no. So here's the thing. I did not enjoy playing. I played Mercurius combo at Worlds. And, like, that deck was so, like, one-trick pony and, like, kind of boring. I tried to play Soul. I tried to play Mars, and I'm terrible at Burn, and I don't enjoy it. Soul, for me, brought, like, that counter, the Ancient Magic stuff, into a very different creative space that made it a lot more fun. So I say this from the perspective of, as someone who goes wide, all 5 of those rulers I enjoyed building for, and I enjoyed playing, which I don't think has happened for me in a set since then, or really even before then. There's always been like a ruler where I'm just like, oh, I gotta build a deck for this, and I have no care about it at all. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, Flute. I don't give a crap about Flute. Like, I didn't enjoy it.
Of all the rulers in that set, you hate Flute. Flute
I didn't
was the
enjoy.
best ruler in that
I didn't.
set.
So that's the thing is, I didn't enjoy
you had
it.
more fun building for Adelbear than you did for Flute. Like, say that out loud. Say that out loud right now for the world to see.
No, but I'm not saying. But I was interested. Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting.
Way more fun than Flute.
Absolutely. Like, like every set like no other set in Force of Will for me has introduced me 5 concepts and 5 rulers that I look at every one and go, this is going to be fun to build for. Like, no other set has done it before that. No other set has done it since that. Like, the closest we came to that has maybe, I don't know, like, I'm trying to look at all the different rulers to see if there was a change in that.
Maybe?
Like, maybe freaking, like, it's hard for me to even say, like, Time Spinning Witch, mainly because Scheherazade was in it.
Yeah.
But, and, like, yeah, like, yeah. But, like, there hasn't been a single set where I've been like, yep, all 5 of these rulers, all 10 of these rulers, all 3 of these rulers, I'm super pumped to try to build them. I'm super pumped to try to figure them out in a way that's fun and cool to show on, and I'm going to enjoy it. So I think that LEL did its job perfectly. It had just enough cool concepts that fit into each ruler. All of the rulers by themselves with the support were fun and unique to play, and the deck building space was fun enough to be able to pull cards from other old archetypes, and it was just good. I think it was a solid addition.
All right, Frank, do you have an idea?
I need to preface my idea with a statement.
Oh, boy.
Because over time, I've realized that relative to other people, my ability to enjoy and, like, sort of see something while taking one thing out of the picture is a little higher than most. Basically, I can tolerate, like, my tolerance for pulling out something bad.
Can I guess? Am I allowed to guess what it is now?
Yeah, go for it. Give me a guess.
So maybe we're on different pages, but I actually think that RDE was a great set if you just don't have Prisia, or if Prisia is a balanced ruler.
That was my second pick.
Echoes? Are you about to pick Echoes?
No, worse. I'm about to tell you about this set called Time Spinning Witch.
Yeah.
Specifically, for the same reason as RDE, that basically with RDE you pull out Prisia or print Prisia with costs that make sense.
Right, yeah.
And the Time Spinning Witch set, you just don't, like, this is accepting the fact that historically Scheherazade was awful and it ruined the set's historical appeal. But if you take it out of that, Aimul was a really cool new archetype that had some, like, cards that were for herself, but some cards that also worked alone. Like, Mephistopheles is one that hasn't seen a ton of play, but I've used it in quite a few decks because it does a lot of cool things that White wants to do, and you can sort of put it in other places. Separation of Fates was, like, just, like, a really handy card to have. Like, even the red cards here, like, this is some Keurig stuff, but, like, this is where we got Ultra Dragon. This is where we have Heaven Sundering, which is just the good 1-drop to replace the last set's one.
That was a whole inverse mechanic as well, right?
Yeah, this was also a set that did a good job of, like, this is part of the reason, I guess, because I like, not all the time, but I do like archetypal, like, sets and clusters. This was a set that did a really good job of blending heavy archetypal stuff while giving you some flexible stuff. Like, Rebellious Soul Ayu was a archetype card that was, like,
Brandon again.
But it's also just a fine card on its own, where it's a 2-drop, like, it's a good body that has a slightly situational interactive effect. Like, it's a well-designed card that's then really good in a specific deck. Like, hell, over time, like, we were initially really scared of Rachel, but, like, over time, she just hasn't been that bad. She's been, like, really strong and, like, been scary a couple of times, but she's never really been oppressive. And so in the end, what we have is this really cool card that, like, different kinds of green decks can use.
This is actually a little bit of a side topic, but literally just yesterday I was talking to someone about how the fact that Rachel isn't good is not a good sign. It means that the format is way too broken, because reading Rachel, she should be really good, and the fact that, like, spending 3 mana is just impossible is a very bad indicator of the format.
Okay, but, like, another card, I'll give an example of a well-designed card, is the Flip Grim card. It's a black card that on its own does what it's supposed to do. Like, it can produce everything it needs to do its own thing, but it's a payoff for mystery counter decks. It's a payoff for Aimul. But it's also, like, outside of it, if the format ever gets too, like, white-black removal heavy, all of a sudden you have this threat that gets really sticky. The whole Dusk Girl mechanic was really cool, but, like, several of its, like, core cards were just inherently, like, they do something they're supposed to do, and in the specific scenario they get a lot better. Like, there was a lot of cool going on in this set, and a lot of what I think are actually very well-designed cards. It's just, it had this elephant in the room, and by elephant I mean, like, an elephant the size of a blue whale.
Nice.
And I would say the same thing, honestly, about RDE. Like, that was, like, when I think back to that cluster, I'm thinking, like, Mariabella was one of my favorite cards. Like, that's from RDE. RDE was also where they had, like, in the first set, they released that cycle of, like, dual color cards, where it's like, if you have one mode, you can choose modes, or if
dual
you have
modes, the packs.
You can do both.
The packs.
I'd have to go back and double check, but I do remember, like, the RDE cycle being much better designed.
Yep, I agree.
I was so excited for K5 or K4 to, like, actually be able to play that card, and then Prissy came out at the same time, and, like, you just couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
And you never, like, there were, like, a couple formats where maybe you could play K4, but, like, Prissy just kind of ruined it.
And this is another one where, like, I think the difference in, like, the types of games we play, like, comes into play. Because I have played K4 in a few different formats, and she was, like she is a card where you inherently have to build into her, and she didn't, like, maximize a ton of set space to let you do that, but, like, her deck was fun, and, like, there were different, like, there were slight differences you could do on it, like,
Exodia.
Like, Brandon and I fought to the end of days about K4 decks because he wanted to basically push into just being, like, pure Sphinx's Rev. They just never get to do anything again, control. And I'm like, no, but what if I, like, killed them? And Brandon would just shake his head at me and, like, no, Frank, never kill them.
I never.
So you should know. You're imprinted in my head now, because, like, whenever I was at States playing just, like, a pure green-white control, like, there were multiple times where, like, all right, I can take this line and start threatening them. In the back of my mind, I'm just like, nope, little Brandon says not yet. It's time to stop them from doing stuff. Not
yet. So I really like the fact that all four of us had very different sets, and I think that's really cool. And I think that speaks to all of our different backgrounds and experiences and enjoyment of Force of Will. So that's pretty cool.
I'm going to need your shirt size, because I'm going to bring you a shirt to Orlando that says Little Brandon says not yet.
So, Brandon, you have a game for us. Brandon, you have a game for us to wrap up the night.
I do. Okay, so this is going to be hopefully a lot of fun, and I want everyone at home to play along. So,
is there a link that they need?
There is no link that you need. You need nothing at all except a Google document, a piece of paper, and a pencil in front of you, or a Google spreadsheet, whatever you want. Pull something, and I'll give you a couple seconds to get that. So what we're going to do is play a game very similar to categories. Basically, I'm going to give you a prompt or something to follow, and you have to come up with as many entries into that category as possible. For instance, if I said something like dog breeds, you would say poodle, hound, husky. You'd go down that list. So I'm going to give you one of those, and you have to name as many as possible. I'm also going to tell you the number of legal entries, and they're all forcible related, obviously. The number of legal entries, and you're going to have 30 seconds to come up with as many as possible. All of these have upwards of 20 entries on them, I believe. And so you should never run out. You shouldn't come up with all of them. Actually, one of them has only 14, but you shouldn't be able to come up with all of them.
Sure. Okay.
Does anyone have questions about this very simple game?
Nope.
I have no questions about this very simple game.
All right, and post your score in the chat if you're playing along, and we'll
see who can come out on top.
3
rounds?
Oh,
3 rounds?
How much time do we have?
I have 4 rounds, and when we can do as much as it's going to be 30 seconds. Right?
Sure.
30? I can't. That's 0.5 per second. All right, here we go.
Well, yeah, you shouldn't come up with all of them, but that's
here we go.
All right. So our first category that we have is, and you have 30 seconds, names of God's arts. Go.
Jeez. Names of God's arts.
I got one.
I think we all have Chrono Break.
I know, like, all of the rulers. I don't know what their God's arts are. Oh, my lord.
Oh, no, this is not going well.
Oh, jeez.
Can I phone a friend? What's Rezart's God art do? Jesus Christ.
I know what they all do. I can name what they all do, but not what their names are. Frank's just like, I've got this.
Yeah, Frank's already done.
Right, well, that's time, and you guys came up with 1, 1, and 2.
Oh.
I can tell you what all of them do. I can tell you what, like, a bunch of them do. Okay. What is the one that Frank got that we didn't?
Grand Entrance.
Frank got Grand Entrance. You guys each got Chrono Break.
The Welser Resonator.
Every single card.
Come on, guys. Starting by Dave if you're only going to get 2.
Okay. Next category. Jeez Louise, we suck.
I was actually planning to read the ones you guys didn't get, but now there's just too many.
Yeah, I can name every card. I'm pretty sure.
Oh well, Purgus Knight. God.
I can tell you that one. Oh man, I'm thinking like the Alice Resonator that I don't know the name of. I'm thinking all 7 Kings. I'm thinking Welser. I'm thinking like, oh my god.
Welser doesn't have a God art. Oh yeah, it's the Quick Cast. The Resonator does.
Yeah. I know all the goddamn resonators.
I can tell you every card that has a god art, but not what it's called.
I can tell you what all of them do.
So what's our second category, Brandon? So they don't die in their own sadness.
There were 29 legal entries for that.
Yep, that's
9 gods arts.
I am the 1%. That's 3%.
All right, moving on to the next category. Are you guys ready?
Yes.
No. Yes.
Cards currently legal in New Frontiers that feature the word cancel.
That feature the word cancel?
That have the word cancel in their card text, currently legal in New Frontiers.
Jeez. I'm terrible at this. Can I go back to the old game? I'm gonna concede.
Oh, there's so many of these.
There's so many of these.
I can't remember. I think that's what it's called.
No, it's not it.
Gonna type the red edition, whatever it's called.
I type Windscled Refuge, but red. Oh god. I need an adult. God, Frank sounds like he's got this down. Oh man.
All right, that's time, you guys.
Okay, I got 9. I got 9.
Oh, I did not have it down. I got 4.
I got 9.
I spelled the last one really bad. That's supposed to be Sealing Scroll.
Are we gonna count Wind Secluded Refuge but red?
No, we are not.
Hold on, isn't it like Sandora's Palace?
Sandora. Yeah.
Sandora. I said Shangri-La, which is the wrong one. It's Sandora.
So
I had the following. Lorites.
Yeah.
Or Lorite. Lorite's Wind, I think is what it's called.
I have Lorite's Deletion Magic.
Lorite's
different card.
Hold on. Let me.
Lorite's Depletion Magic and a Lorite's Wind are both legal entries.
Okay, so let's hold on. Let me go through my list, Ryan, and then if you have ones that I didn't get, we'll go from there. So
I don't know if it was the same card. That was my bad.
So Lorite's Wind, Key's Call, Aaron's Blade, Fair's Spell, Vanish, Ruin Story, 0. So that's 8 because Shangri-La is Sandora and therefore doesn't count. So I had 8.
Okay.
I also had Mephistopheles because he cancels.
Does not say cancel.
Doesn't feature the word
prevention.
He prevents the trigger.
Sure. I wrote them down just in case. Song of the Fairies is the rune. I also had Lori's Deletion Magic. Windscled Refuge but red is Sandora's Palace to the best of my knowledge. I could be wrong. And then I had Sealing Scroll, but I spelled it abysmally.
So how many did you have, Ryan?
Legally, like 8. Are we counting Windscled Refuge?
Oh, sorry. Mephistopheles and Wind Secluded don't count. So it's,
so I had 8.
So I also had 8. So then it was a tie.
I only had 4. I had Song of Fairies, Sandora, Gil Lapis, Inheritor of the Stars, and Karura the Crow Tengu.
So Frank
can't be canceled. There you go. Yep, that's the swap. And Gil, Gil, the Inheritor of the Stars.
This one, I'll actually read you guys the ones that none of you got.
Gil the I know that one of them's Gil the Inheritor of the Stars.
That was on my list.
Well, I didn't hear it say. I didn't hear you say it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Kara.
Okay, what did we miss?
Heaven's Thundering Strike, which can't be canceled if you control a
the Taoist.
The Taoist.
Yeah.
None of you got Magic Stone of Faith, which makes it so humans and Valkyries cannot be canceled.
Sure.
None of you got Jupiter Warlock of the Woodstar. None of you got Blazer the Legendary Thief, which cancels abilities that targeting. None of you got Ancient Impact, which can't be canceled if you control Dust Girl. None of you got Last Days of a Powerless Draconoid. None of you got Ruin Story. Oh, wait, Ryan got Ruin Story.
Me and Jeremy both got Ruin Story.
I got Ruin Story as well.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of you guys got the Eternal Tower.
Nope.
Eternal
so
Tower.
7? So we missed 7?
Yep.
Not too bad.
Not bad. All right, that was a good. That should have been the first one. The second one was a business.
Okay, here we go. Category 3. So does that mean we all technically have 1 point?
No. Your points are equal to the number that you've gotten so far.
Oh, geez, the points are equal to the number we've gotten so far. So I currently have 9 points.
Same. We're killing it, Jeremy.
Frank, you have how many?
6.
6. So okay, 9, 9, and 6. Okay.
Frank, this next one's for you.
Oh man.
I'm gonna up the time to 45 seconds because it's taken.
That on the 30 felt too long.
My apologies. 45 is what we're going to.
Sure.
All right. Resonators, Legal and Wanderer, that have total cost of 7 or greater.
I didn't study because you changed the category, you freaking son of a
That are
bitch.
legal in Wanderer?
Yes,
Yeah.
and if you were wondering, there are 17 entries.
Yeah.
Sorry, how much does the cost?
7 or more?
Resonators?
Resonators only.
7 or more? Shit.
Yeah.
Oh god. The big machine guy. You got a name, right? Holy
Yep.
shit.
10 seconds left. Big machine gun.
Oh no.
All
I
right.
should have built that competitive
Okay,
fishing deck.
I had 5?
The number of stick shots you guys have.
I have 5.
Oh,
I have
no.
I have
Drops on there.
I have 1.
I have 5 that I believe are more than 7. And that would be Gil the Treacherous Child. This is the Vingolf 3 one. I think that's the Treacherous
He's a
Child.
6-drop.
Is he a 6-drop? Okay, I wasn't
He's
quite sure.
Yep.
I have Great Archeolon.
Also a 6-drop.
I have Anubis.
That one's good. That one works.
Oh my god. 5 drops. What the hell?
Remote Golem.
That one works.
And Maximilian, who I think is a 6-drop.
Also a
He's
six.
a 6-drop.
So I'll take
Alright,
my
my
2
turn.
points.
Ready? I've got Thunderlord Ragnarok, who's a 6-drop.
Yep.
I've got the big machine guy.
Which doesn't count.
I've got Yamada no Orochi.
There you go.
Yeah, I forgot both
And
Yamadas.
I've
I'm
got
not good with that.
Yamada no Oogle Boogle.
So Ryan gets
I know
1 point.
I know there's another Yamada. I just don't know how he's different.
There are 2 Yamadas that both count.
Yeah.
And Yamato no Oogle Boogle.
So Ryan gets 1 point.
This is bullshit.
I got 2 that neither of you got.
That's because Frank knows Force of Will.
Frank, what do you got?
Yeah, I had Yogg Sothoth, the
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
inheritance one that wipes a field,
Yep, Yogg-Sothoth.
and then Umar at to will, the
Yep.
combo card. And then I had the mechanical golem. The,
So you had
the
3?
10 drop.
So you had 3 total?
Yeah.
God, he's caught up, dude.
Okay, so this is all the
No,
ones that you guys get. Amit, the Beast of Gluttony. The
Yep.
Fox Knitter.
I know these cards.
Avon Hardens, which is a random Vingol card. Hades, Lord of the Dead. Ice Dragon of
Yep.
Altair.
Yep.
Lumia, Saint of the World Awakening.
Yep.
Skyscraper Giant.
I literally looked at the database entry earlier today for 6 drops and up, and all of these ones that you're saying are like, yep, forgot it.
How do I
Titania,
forget the Skyscraper Giant? My
Titania?
favorite Skyscraper Giant.
Titania!
Prideful Queen. Ultimate Magic Warrior Gear Atmos. Valentina, the Crumbling Illusion. Yigdor, the Beast of the World. And Yogg-Sothoth, the Dark Myth.
Yep. Okay, last round. Current score is 11. Current score is 11 to 9 to
I got
The
one.
last one is so easy that if you guys don't get at least 10 of them, I'm going to be very sad.
Okay, so 11 to 10 to 9. Frank, you have 9?
Yeah.
Okay, 11 to 10 to 9. Close game.
45 seconds on the last round.
Here we go.
Talking about runes that have a total cost of 1. Go. 45 seconds.
Total cost of 1.
A total cost of 1.
And note that sometimes you don't actually pay 1 for some runes that have a cost of 1.
Yeah. Frickle frack.
Just go grab my rune binder real quick. Nah, like this is not good for me at all.
Ryan is killing this one.
I got nothing. Like Shadow Step or whatever, even though I know that's not what it's called. Total
Alright,
cost
that's
of 1.
time, you guys.
Yeah, I know what I'm talking about, but I always forget that it's not called this because you think that it would be called this, but it's not called this. And like the 1-drop green that like makes something have barrier, I always call it Shadow Step. It's like Whirlwind something, Whirlwind technique. I think it's what it's called. So I'm gonna count myself because I corrected myself before Ryan did, and I'm gonna give myself a point for that one. And then Sandstorm, I have 2.
Okay, I got 9.
Yeah, I conceded that one horribly.
Yeah, I have rest target resonator. Does that count?
Not quite.
Yeah.
No.
All right, we got Sandstorm, Rain of Tears, Putrefy, Monstrosify, Explosion, Whirlwind Technique, Snipe Away Me, Rapid Fire Me, and Fuma Shuriken.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well done.
Haha.
Frank got only ones that Ryan got, although he did say Scrap and Build, which is a 3-drop.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
Did I end up in last place? I have 13.
You didn't ask for Worlds. You had a disadvantage.
Oh yeah, that's the one that gets. I forgot.
Yeah.
I thought Scrap Build was one that got more expensive out of your rune deck, not the other way around.
So I have my total score at the end was 13. Ryan has 19.
Excellent.
Frank has...
It sounds like I have 12.
That was solid. That was solid.
You did good. I was really worried.
You guys didn't get.
Yeah, what was it I get?
Actually, hold on. There's like a couple of white ones. There's Destroy Target Rested J Ruler.
Is it Blessing of an Angel? Is that the... No, that's not the one that gives yourself barrier. I couldn't
Blessing of an Angel...
Cost 3.
That's called Light of the Moon, and it is a legal entry.
Yeah, Light of the Moon is legal. But
yeah, I just couldn't remember its name. I put Give Yourself
It's also the
barrier.
ring. The ring. The Ring of Salvation.
Ring of Nibelung, isn't it?
It's called...
The Eternal Ring.
Ring of Legend.
Ring of Legend, whatever.
You guys did get Dragon's Dance, Dragon's Flight, Explore the Unknown. Good one to not get. Did Ryan deleted his? Did you get Fuma Shurikens?
I did a Fuma Shuriken, yeah.
Did you get Turntail?
Nope.
No, that was the one. I knew there was like 4 white ones that I don't know the name of.
No, I don't. I'm not too familiar with the runes.
And Undeath. Cool. So you guys did a lot worse than I expected, but you know what? That's fine.
Hey, that was super fun, Brandon, though. Thank you for bringing that concept. So, Ryan, now it falls to you. You get to bring
Pictionary next week, ladies and gentlemen.
We're playing some Pictionary. Sounds good. We'll have to figure out a way to make it even possible for the people at home to see what we're drawing. But we'll figure it out.
Did anyone at home play along and want to share their honest score?
Someone had 14.
Okay.
Derek ended up at 14 points. Hyperion CG is at 9. It looks like most people are like 15 or less. So, Ryan, it seems like you're the grand champion overall.
I mean, literally half my points were runes that cost 1. So
there you go. But that brings us to the end of tonight. Thank you guys so much, as always, for watching. If you like what we do and you want to support us, go ahead and check us out on Patreon, as well as all the different links down below to cool merch, playmats, all kinds of cool stuff. We really appreciate it. It helps us do all this cool stuff and bring it to you. And until next time, this has been Jeremy Franklin, DMO73, and I've been joined by Ryan Miles.
Oh, hold on, wait.
Brandan Bremont. And Frank Klosser. And we will see you all next week. Have a great night, everybody.